It is the Holy War. It is the time for BYU and Utah fans to really get after one another. What is ultimately going to play out in this game? Well, it's a good thing you asked, because we're going to talk with JT Wistersill in a crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view. Actually, just say Locked On Cougars and Locked On Utes your first view and or listen of the day, as always. And obviously, a big thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, use the promo code Locked On College, and get $20 off your first purchase. Ahead on today's show, we're going to talk about the Holy War, BYU, Utah, and everything involved in this game. And JT Wistersill, host of Locked On Utes, covering all things Utah, joins me. And JT, I'm going to start right out the chute. Do you want to join Jaylon Glover in saying an expletive?
I will pass on that. I will. I like this job. I'm gonna pass on that one. I'll leave that to St. Bill Snyder for those of you that ever tune into our Locked On crossovers when those get wild. But I will say, like, yes, I don't love the word he used, but the passion that comes with this rivalry is what makes it great. And I'm so excited to have this back. Didn't we do this in a way? Didn't Cam Rising at Big 12 Media Day say something? And then your guy Connor Pay even said, like, yeah, we can't stand those guys either. Like, didn't we do something like that?
Yeah. So you had Cam Rising get up at Big 12 Media Day. I'm pretty much looking forward to going down there and whooping their ass. That was the term he used. And then Connor Pay's like, yeah, I hope he would say that, because we want to see the exact same feeling about this. Here's the thing about this rivalry for any Utah or BYU fan who may be confused. The passion amongst the players, it's just as intense as the fan bases out there, because JT, you and I both see the social media interaction between these two fan bases, and it's pretty epic. But these players, they're passionate and they're ready to go out there and put on for their teams and hopefully represent both universities well.
They are. And from a Utah perspective, the 2021, the seniors from like that group have accomplished so much, right? Pac-12 championships, like really good season, Rose Bowl berths, everything. What's the one thing they haven't done? They haven't beaten BYU. Pretty much every successful, literally they won 9 years in a row, right? For Utah did, right? So all these other recent Utah players can say they at least did that. That's the one thing that BYU's done. And it's still, coming into this game, it's still wild to think we're in this position, right? Where BYU's win total coming into the year was 4.5. We did a preview before the season, talk about what this game would be, what it would look like. And now BYU ranked inside the top 10, should be even higher in my opinion, based on what the CFP rankings did, but that's no surprise with the SEC and Big Ten bias. But anyways, I do think that this game is still going to be a lot of fun. Yes, BYU is the better team right now, but this is a rivalry game. And even though I talked about Utah's recent success in the rivalry, Jake, you did a great job mentioning too, all of those rivalries and games were close. But really quick, back to the passion. Utah's head coach in waiting, just speaking of expletives, also has a clip that's been making the rounds that he said too. So the passion involved in this rivalry is what makes it special. And I'm so excited to have it back, not just this year, but moving forward.
Well, that's the other thing about this. And I was going to ask you, and I'll get your thought on this. Now, 2021 doesn't seem that long ago, but it's 3 full seasons ago, JT. Yeah. And according to Kyle Whittingham, I think the Utes have 10 guys who may have played in this game. BYU, I think, has 9 or 10 guys. So amongst 260 some odd players on both of these respective rosters combined, 20 guys have got experience playing in this rivalry. And it's wild to consider how much turnover has happened in those 3 years with the transfer portal and obviously just the inevitable guys moving on with life, etc. Do you think that's going to affect to any degree the overall tenor of this rivalry? Because I'm with you. The fact that it's back and it's going to have stakes on it moving forward as members of the Big 12 conference, totally cool with that. It's something I grew up with, them being in the same conference. So I love that fact. But I just wonder if it's going to take maybe a game or two to really get that real true passion back into this matchup.
It may. Before we actually dive into that, I'm curious for BYU's perspective. Utah has 2 guys, would be 3 if Cam Rising was healthy, that played in this game in 2019. Does BYU have any of those guys? 2019?
2019. I'd have to look at that. I can think of one guy in particular that may have, but I'd be hard pressed to name them off the top of my head. And that's crazy to consider. Maybe some guys from 2019 are still around that have played in this.
What's wild is that was Micah Bernard, or actually that was the 2021 game when Micah Bernard went out. But like Micah Bernard and Brant Keithy, like the two best players on Utah's offense were on this team in 2019. So it's not just like, oh, there's a random like the old kicker in college thing like that. But no, I think there could be something to what you said about it taking maybe a little bit of time to reach those levels, but I don't know. I mean, you already said it off the top about the social media comments and everything we've seen. The players got to be fired up. We already mentioned how for Utah, like this is the biggest game left on their season, and they still have another top 15 team, Iowa State, now coming up. Colorado is another one too, but the implications are so massive for Utah to go in and try to beat your rival and derail their season. And look, BYU is the better football program right now in 2024, but I think Utah can say like, oh, hey, if you look at us overall consistently, we've been better in these other years. Even in our down year, we were still able to beat BYU. So if Utah was able to beat BYU, they could say, hey, that was more of a blip on the radar this down year and we'll bounce back. But if BYU rolls in and just demolishes Utah, then there really isn't going to be an argument for who has the better program in the state right now. And that's another thing that it pales in for recruiting massively. But it does feel like these players are fired up, even if it maybe is not to the same level as it used to be, which you could speak to that better than I can, Jake.
Well, here's the thing. I know that these players are passionate, especially guys who grew up in state. Like Karene Reed for Utah.
Yes.
The experiences they come. He grew up a BYU guy. His dad and his uncle both played at the Y. So he grew up a BYU guy. He decided to go to Utah, and he's a dyed-in-the-wool Ute now. And same thing, we had Chase Hansen on my radio show earlier this week, and he said the exact same thing. His dad was a BYU guy through and through. Chase was a BYU guy, and he said that he said it didn't take him very long to completely flip allegiances when he went to Utah, but it's the same thing. We've got Ephraim Asiata playing down in Provo, Utah. Matt was an absolute legend for the Utes, and the fact that his son is now suiting up for the Cougars, the crossover.
Isaac Wilson,
and start. Yeah. So you look at this, and it's absolutely incredible the ties between these two universities. But that's what makes this rivalry, I think, one of the most unique in all of college football, JT, because we all know that Utah as a state, we're very proud to be Utahns and to represent what the Beehive State is all about. But more importantly, when it comes to this in-state rivalry, these players, they want nothing more than to get one over on the guys they grew up playing with and against.
Absolutely. I mean, the passion, like you said, I think that's the biggest thing, right? Like growing up against these guys, that added competitive fire of going against your brother. Like, you love him off the field, but man, when you're on the field, you want the bragging rights. You want to prove that you're the best. And the other thing that's so great about having this game back too, is it does put the best two programs in the state of Utah against each other. So it puts Utah itself, the state, football, everything there on a higher stage and level. Unfortunately, Utah didn't live up to their end of the bargain. So this game does not have a better time slot, but it still carries a BYU top 10 team still on, ESPN, even if it is a late night kick too. But yeah, these guys have been growing up against each other. They've been waiting for this moment for years. The fans have been waiting and building towards it too. So you're right. You don't have the recent history like this time next year. We'll have, hey, remember when so-and-so did this and he's still on your team? Like, oh, we're ready for that. Like, we don't have that, even though we have a couple of those old guys we talked about too. But the fact that you haven't had a chance to get your rival in a long time. And I'll say this, Jake, I'll talk about this more on my show on Friday, but we can talk about it a little bit now too. Could be Kyle Whittingham's last game in this rivalry,
which is wild to consider. And that's a question we need to talk about. I've got another key one. Now, Utah is going to be a home underdog in this game, and Utah as a home dog is a really rare thing to talk about. I've got one key question relating to that, JT, and I'm going to ask you on the other side, so stay with us. We'll get more of this. Here's the thing about this. This is a rivalry. It's unique. It's intense, and we'll continue to break it down on a crossover edition of Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Robinhood. Now, Robinhood is here for you guys to take care of you when it comes to your investing needs. The best part about Robinhood is you don't need a silver spoon to eat at the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold is allowing the others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of high high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new Gold Center is here with Robinhood Gold Center, Robinhood.com/gold, excuse me. That's Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For specific disclosure, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change, and gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys. Take care of whatever you need when it comes to your sports betting needs. The best part is you can get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, as they are America's #1 sports book. Right now, you can new customers bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app, gives you everything you need to place your live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you have a hunch in the middle of a game, you can go online, check out the latest stats, you live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with that $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. It's as simple as that. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Utes your first view and or listen of the day. Jake Hatch, JT Wister still along for the ride with you guys. And JT, you talk about Kyle Whittingham potentially participating in his final rivalry game. Remember, this is a guy who played for BYU back in the 70s and 80s. So he has been linked with this for going on near 50 years. It's absolutely incredible to consider how long his connection is to this rivalry. The other thing about it is, as he mentioned earlier this week, there are 10 members. We counted up 10 members of the BYU staff, both on-field and off-field roles with BYU's staff, who have been at Utah. So he has got a major role to play in this game coming up on Saturday. But more importantly, both the past, the present, and the future of the rivalry itself.
Wouldn't it be symbolic if BYU beat Utah? Because in many ways, it's kind of feeling like the end for Kyle Whittingham. This season has been a disaster. I mean, you can argue the most disappointing season genuinely in Utah football history. When you have people like myself, unfortunately, who before the season were saying this team could go to the college football playoff, deserve to be the favorite in the Big 12. And Brock talked about this on our crossover show that'll drop tomorrow, but Utah has one Big 12 win. BYU has, are we at 6 of them now, Jake? I want to say for you guys?
5 currently. Yeah.
5 currently. I'm not trying to count this weekend for Utah fans before you get mad. I was not trying to jump that far ahead.
That chicken before it hatches, go right on ahead, my friend.
Yeah. There's a joke in there when you saying Hatch, Jake Hatch, but I'm not smart enough to make it. Anyway, so looking at this game, though, this is once again, like, it could be symbolic of Kyle, who's had so much success against BYU. If he does lose this one too, it would just be another example of how this team has gotten away from the consistency that they had. The fact that BYU is favored in this game, and number one, they deserve to be favored in this game, like by far, because of what they've both done on the year. I mean, I still can't believe that Utah is coming off 4 straight losses, the most recent of which is to Houston. Thank you, Houston, for making us look a little bit better by beating Kansas State, something you Cougar fans also know about. But yeah, it is really fascinating. I think this could be Kyle Whittingham's last game. His legacy has been so impressive, and he wants to go out on top, at least in this rivalry. And it's going to be very hard to do just that against this really talented Cougars team.
Now, here's the other question I've got for you, JT, because it's very rare that Utah is a home underdog, especially against BYU. I would think you have to go back maybe to 2006 in that thrilling game for Utah. The last win up at Rice-Eccles. More importantly, I think is BYU is a favorite going into that matchup up in Salt Lake City. So here's the deal. What is it going to take? And I guess more importantly, would this make Utah's season if they can knock BYU from the ranks of the unbeatens amidst everything else that's going on with the Utes?
It would be by far the best thing they've done. I was thinking about this earlier. Like, if you look over the course of Utah football recent history, there's a marquee win. 2 years ago, it was, USC or like Oregon in the regular season, those back-to-back Pac-12 championship years. Even last year, I know USC didn't end up being great, but the fact that Utah found a way to win at USC, that was such a major win. Utah's best win on the year, I don't even know, is it Oklahoma State at this point? Maybe it was the Baylor one early on. Like, that's where it's like Utah hasn't had that win yet. This would by far be, because this would be this is the sentence, right? If Utah wins this game, Utah's season was massively disappointing, but we beat BYU. Like, that is exactly what everyone will say. You at least got your rival. every year. That's what you can hang your hat on basically in these games. Even like, why is Ryan Day on the hot seat when he's been incredibly successful? Because every year he said, we had a really good season, but we lost to Michigan. Like, that's what this would be basically for Utah, is they're trying to get that, yes, disappointment, but trying to circle back around to that. So I do think this would make Utah season be by far the highlight of their season. And as good as BYU has been, there's a reason we just talked about FanDuel. Like, the line is close on this game. Utah's going to have a chance to win this. I do, even though BYU should be favored, as we discussed, there's are reasons to believe that Utah can shock the world and beat the Cougars.
Yeah, so our friends at FanDuel, it opened at -4.5 in favor of BYU. Last I saw it, got to -4. I was trying to pull it up, and my browser doesn't want to pull it up for some reason. But so it's a close game. Now, if you go by the old betting parlance, home team always gets 3 points. So essentially, it's a 7-point spread for BYU. So a touchdown difference.
Neutral site, yeah.
That essentially goes to the whole idea of you and I both know the history of this rivalry. It doesn't get out of hand all too often, and it's going to be a tight game. So the other thing I want to ask you is, because here's the deal. Here's how I perceive this is going to go. And I'm going to get my thought out, and then I'll let you respond to it. Is I see this game going one of two ways. Either BYU gets that rare blowout of Utah, and they embarrass them on Rice-Eccles, their home.
I don't like this.
Second part is this is a game the entire way, and going into the fourth quarter, it's a one-score game. And in that circumstance, my question is the home field advantage going to push Utah just over the top, just enough, as you mentioned, to trip up BYU? That's the way I see this game going. Is either it's a BYU blowout or it is an absolute classic BYU Utah down to the wire finish.
Well, Jake, here's why I see a Utah. No, I can't go there. Honestly, I can't go Utah blowout. I mean, we were talking about a team that's averaged 12 points per game, right? Like, Utah is not capable of blowing BYU out unless something just, insane were to happen. But bye week's only 2 weeks long.
7 times.
What did it say?
Unless Jake Heaps turns it over 7 times or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That would basically, that would be what it has to come down to. But I have a hard time. I'm glad you brought up turnovers. If Utah doesn't win the turnover battle, I don't see how they win this game, because BYU's offense is vastly superior to Utah's offense. What I've been saying all week on my show is I feel like to put themselves in a position to win this game, Utah needs one true touchdown drive in each half. That's such a low bar, but also that's what Utah hasn't been able to do over the last few weeks. And I'm counting on, because 14 points isn't enough to beat the Cougars, right? I am in that counting on Utah to then get a turnover, which BYU has. Retzlaff has 7 interceptions, 14 total fumbles. He haven't lost all of them, but they've turned it over a little bit on the season. And that's where I'm counting on Utah's defense to provide some short fields. Unfortunately, what I also need to count on then is Cole Becker, who has been a little inconsistent, missed his field goals against Houston last week. So it's going to take in some ways, perfect storm. I don't think Utah needs to play perfectly in this game. Come on. We know how many picks Isaac Wilson, Brandon Rose. It doesn't matter who's going to be out. There's the odds of Utah not throwing interception against a BYU team who has 14 of them on the season. It's not very likely. But Utah is going to do everything in their power not to put the game in their quarterback's hands. So that's how I feel like Utah's best thing is going to be to just try and muck it up, make it close, play defense, run the ball well. Micah Bernard is top 30 in the nation in rushing yards. He's top 20 in missed tackle rate, actually, which is impressive. I got that from our friends at Pro Football Focus. But I am curious in this game, Jake, what do you think BYU needs to do to not give Utah any chance to make it close in the fourth quarter?
They need to do what they did in 1996. I'm going to go back to that incredible season that BYU had. They went 14-1 that year. And JT, that year, Steve Sarkisian at the helm of the BYU offense. He had an absolutely monster season, just statistics wise. He led BYU to a 14-1 record, a win in the Cotton Bowl over Kansas State. But the rivalry game against Utah, Lavelle Edwards and his coaching staff went completely against their whole ethos. They ran for more than 300 yards that day against the Utes, if I recall correctly, up at Rice-Eccles Stadium. It wasn't Salt Lake City. It was then Rice Stadium. And they absolutely just steamrolled the Utes. They did not allow the Utes to get off the deck at all. And I'm telling you right now, BYU's had a resurgent rushing attack the last 2 games. They've been on the field north of 250 yards rushing in their last 2 contests. If they want to make this a laugher and make it a quote-unquote stroll in the park at RES, they got to do exactly what they did to UCF and also Oklahoma State and just run it down Utah's throat.
Yeah, and this is a Utah team that, look, they just got gashed on the ground against Houston. But for the most part on the season, yes, they've been susceptible at times on the ground, but there's still a top 60 rush defense overall. What's been Utah's Achilles heel is the big plays. They unfortunately had to play Cam Scadaboo, which was not fun at all. I would not recommend that.
Scadabooyah, baby. BYU's going to see him. BYU's going to see him in 3 weeks' time, and I can tell you, Cougar fans, they're wary of that young man. But to your point, the susceptibility to big plays, BYU's thrived on big play all year long. They love to soften you up with the run, and then Aaron Roderick, who Utah fans know very, very well, he will throw it down the field over your head. And trust me, I'm expecting BYU to come in with an idea that we're going to run the ball, and when they start creeping up with those safeties, we're going to go right over the top with guys like Darius Lasser and Chase Roberts and see if Utah can hold up against it.
Yeah, and Utah's very aggressive. We know they play a lot of man coverage. Yep. They will get beat at times on the outside for that big play, that 20-yard pass play. Now, you got to be careful about testing them though, because it's a talented defensive backfield. They're 13th against the pass. Cameron Calhoun, Smith Snowden, Zemiah Vaughn, very talented defensive back. So if you consistently try to go at them, and like we said, Retzlaff has thrown some interceptions too. So if you guys end up in a lot in 3rd and longs, I don't think that is an ideal situation. Make it 3rd and manageable. That's where you're allowed, okay, the run game can stay consistent too. And I am very curious who's going to play in this game for Utah, because one of the reasons their rushing defense hasn't been as strong is they've always missing someone. Against Houston, they're down their top 2 starting defensive tackles, which we could do a whole episode on the injury thing that Utah continues to go through. And it's not this year, it's not fluky. It's like what's going on that leads to your guys continuing to get hurt, including somehow Sam Hewitt. I don't know how a quarterback got hurt for a 2nd straight year at Utah, but there are talented guys on this front 7 for Utah. I was very high on them coming into the season. They have not performed up to that standard, but I do think there is reason to believe as they continue to get back and get healthier that they can hold the Cougars, not stop them. But I do think Utah is capable of holding BYU under 200 yards rushing in this game.
Well, if they do, that'll give them a fighting chance. We've seen Utah's defense; they've been very good. Now, I'm gonna anger you, BYU fans and elate Utah fans with this comment. One thing that could really set the tone for this one is, as Utah fans have come to watch BYU and Utah games, is a pick 6. Utah's still looking one for on the season, and that could be a really big play if they can pull something like that off on Saturday. And I know that Cougar fans are cursing my name right now because they can remember vividly those happening against Utah in the recent past. But it's going to be an interesting one, JT. So we will get to more of our specific predictions, keys to the game, and the like coming up next as we roll on right here on a crossover edition of Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Hims. Now, a lot of us are men out there, but hey, the best part about being a man is sometimes you need help. And the best part is sometimes those intimate moments happen spontaneously. You always want to be ready so you can perform in the bedroom. Hims provides access to treatments that can help you stay hard and last longer, giving you that boosted confidence so you know you can be ready whenever the mood strikes. The best part is Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you the access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. All of us want to avoid that awkward trip to the doctor's office. Let's be very clear about that. The best part about this with Hims, the process is 100% online. So no need for that uncomfortable doctor's visit. And the best part is you answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. It prescribed your medication ships directly to you in discreet packaging for free. Simple as that. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required, and price varies based on product and subscription plan. But once again, that's your friends over at hims.com/lockedon. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Utes your first view and or listen of the day. Final stanza of today's podcast with JT Wistersill. And JT, we've talked a lot about what we expect from this matchup, things that are going to be critical for, in the case of Utah, for an upset, in the case of BYU, maintaining an absolutely magical start to the season, going to 9-0 on the season. I'll say this for BYU. I mentioned the fact that they need to run the ball effectively. You talked about the turnovers from Jake Retzlaff. You can't have the turnover-prone Jake Retzlaff show up in this game. He's been all over the national media lately. He's been on
cool story.
Big show / podcast that you can imagine out there. I think the most recent one was the Heisman Trust. They have their own podcast, and he was on that this week. He is getting just boatloads of attention, and for good reason. Obviously, he's led BYU to an undefeated record. My only concern is, does that distract him enough where he gets maybe, like you said, a little more turnover prone in this game? If that happens, that's going to give Utah every opportunity to spring an upset.
First of all, for those of you that don't know, me and Jake used to call high school football games together, so we developed a little bit of chemistry because, Jake, you basically read my mind, because where exactly I wanted to ask you and go was, look, Retzlaff's been really good. He hasn't thrown for 250 yards against a Power 4 team, though. Also, the last time you guys faced a top 50 defense, I don't know exactly where Kansas State ended up, but your offense did not win you the Kansas State game either. It was the defense and the turnovers in that game too. When you played a true top 50 defense, SMU, you guys didn't get over 20. What is your confidence against a Utah defense that is 20th ranked, that has, once again, underperforming decent defense, but Utah, if they just scored 25 points per game, would only have one loss on the season. I'm not saying that as in like making excuses. I'm saying the defense has done their job every single week. And even though they've given up yards, they've been stingy in the red zone, both against TCU and Houston.
Here's the supreme motivation for BYU this week. They got spurned by the College Football Playoff Committee being ranked ninth in that poll. They have said all the right things when it comes to talking to the media about that, JT. They've been like, oh, we don't really pay attention to it, blah, blah, blah. Bull honky. Sorry. Yeah. This is a team that has thrived on being the underdog and having a chip on their shoulder all season long. Guess what? The CFP committee just gave them their chip on their shoulder for this week. And the other thing about it is, if what the CFP committee said about BYU is true, Kalani Sitake and the Cougars need to pour it on in terms of the wins they have down the stretch here if they're going to really move up in these rankings based on the comments that were made this week. So that's what I think is going to motivate BYU. That supreme motivation is they want to go out and stick it to Utah, win the rivalry game. But more importantly, they want to make a statement literally to the nation that, hey, we're BYU and we're here to play.
That's a great point. Also, you mentioned just for BYU wanting to run the ball, being physical. How has this offensive line performed without Connor Pay?
Pretty well, actually. Bruce Mitchell's an absolute revelation. He was playing defensive line as recently as JT. They sat him down right before spring ball and said, hey, Bruce, we'd like you to move over to the offensive line. He has taken to the offensive line like a duck to water. And the fact that he has started multiple games now at center for BYU, which is one of the toughest positions to master as an offensive lineman, the fact that he's taken to it as well as he has, BYU's had a really, really good offensive line performance of late, and they've got all their guys back. Sonny Mocassini, who also has missed some time of late, he's expected to be full go. Connor pushed everything he could to get back on the field in time for this game. It's going to be next week before he actually gets out there, and he's been on my podcast. He joins me every week. We have an NIL deal with him, and it's really fun to catch up with him, and he's talked about the fact that he's bummed to be missing the game, but he's expressed his supreme confidence that Bruce, Sonny, Austin Leusa, Waylon Lopwaho, all the guys on the interior of that offensive line, he believes they absolutely can get the job done against whoever Utah rolls out at defensive tackle.
And you're right that the rushing results lately have spoke for themselves. What BYU's done has spoke for itself. And this is a talented Utah team, but those names haven't always performed up to the past standard, we'd say, whether that's injury or just inconsistent play. It doesn't really matter. And, the one thing I'll say we haven't talked about a ton yet that I did a good job avoiding up until this point, Utah's quarterback situation is a massive problem in this game. And I've tried not to pile on Isaac Wilson, but I've consistently said, just like when you look at, okay, why didn't this play work? You usually land at the quarterback spot. So whether it's Wilson, Rose, whoever it is, Utah is really going to have to try and maximize the short passing game. Check downs in the flat, all types of screens. You can throw some downfield. Brant Keithy, Dorian Singer are capable of winning in those one-on-one spots. But if you get yourself in third and long consistently, if you fall behind and you think that one of these two quarterbacks who have not been impressive at any opportunities they've been really given outside of a brief moment for Isaac against Oklahoma State, that's not how Utah is going to win this game. They have to keep it close early. And once again, they have to win the turnover battle, in my opinion, or else it's going to be a big day for BYU.
I'll just say this. I am fully expecting it to be Brandon Rose in terms of getting the start for Utah, but I do think that they may have some, hijinks up their sleeve and may work in Isaac Wilson in some form or fashion. I'm with you on that. It'll be interesting how the quarterback situation kind of plays itself out. All right, JT, real quick before what's your prediction for this one?
I think that BYU's offense is going to get off to a little bit of a slow start. I actually think Mike Bajakian, you mentioned getting tricky. I think Mike Bajakian, is Utah's offensive coordinator. Utah's going to get a little creative. I actually think This is good. This is my boldest prediction by far. Utah will score on the first drive of the game. Everyone's going to be surprised. We're going to catch BYU off guard doing some creative things. I actually think BYU is going to fall behind in this game 10-0 early. We're going to be like, what's going on with the Cougars? Then the Cougars are going to bounce back into shape. This game will be tied at half. I think an interception in this game. And you know what, Jake? I'm doing it. I'm going with a pick six. Gives Utah some much needed momentum. This is a back and forth game all the way. But a late fourth down stall by Utah, who's just going to get a field goal drive in the fourth quarter, will make the difference. And that's right. I got all that Utah stuff hanging up in the background for a reason. I am a Utah man through and through. I cannot pick BYU to win this game. Utah shocks the world. This is the first game they're not favored in. So, of course, this would be the one they find a way to win. Utah 23, BYU 20.
Hey, I talked about 1996. I think BYU puts the same score on Utah they did in 96. No. Cougars 37, Utes 17, and they roll to 9-0. So it'll be interesting. It's gonna be a fun one. Gonna be cold weather. Obviously, it's gonna be a lot of passion in the stands as well. Utah and BYU fans love to get after one another. But JT, it's always a pleasure to catch up with you, my friend, and looking forward to this game.
So excited. I've been hosting the show for over 2 years now. This is the first time you and I have ever been able to preview this game. Yeah. So happy that we're almost done talking about it. We each got one more show tomorrow, but we're nearly there to kick off. Jake, you're the man. Love doing this, and can't wait to see how this game plays out.
All right. Big thank you to everybody once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Utes your first view and or listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here once again on the Locked On Podcast Network.